have no idea how to even do this. This is my first time ever doing a live video. So we're going to talk about the jurors and the jury selection in the Derek Chauvin murder trial, the George Floyd murder trial. We're going to talk about how it's possible that they could even get a fair and unbiased jury. We're going to talk about the jurors that they've already picked and what is good and bad about those jurors and whether or not we think they're actually going to be fair and impartial. And also we're going to talk about what the announcement of the city of Minneapolis handing out a $27 million settlement to George Floyd's family is going to do to this murder trial. So the purpose of jury selection is basically to find a fair and impartial jury that doesn't already have their own thoughts and feelings about the case that they're going to be a jury for, which for 99% of cases is easy. You walk in to do your jury duty, you have no idea what case you're going to be picked for. They tell you whether it's a criminal or civil case, if it's a car accident, if it's a murder trial, whatever it may be. And then they start talking to you about whether or not you can be fair and impartial. And one of the things as lawyers that you have to do as trial lawyers in jury selection is determine whether or not this person is bringing biases into the room with them that are going to affect their ability to be fair and impartial. So if somebody comes in and they've been a cop their whole life, they're in a family full of cops, they're always going to believe what a cop says is true, then you probably don't want them as a criminal defense attorney. But other things come into play. If you've got a doctor who is a spine surgeon and it's a car accident case where the person had spine surgery, you might not want that doctor because they're going to bring in all of their knowledge about spine surgeries and patients that they've seen, and they may apply it to your case. But you can't just strike them for any reason. Usually you have to ask, are you able to put that bias aside that you believe every cop that ever takes a stand, that you already have your own thoughts about spine surgery and patients and whether or not they're going to need to have this surgery? Can you put all that aside and be fair and impartial? And if the jury says yes to that, then you can't strike them for cause. There are two types of strikes. Strikes for cause, which means they are not able to be a fair and impartial juror, and you have unlimited amounts of those as a lawyer in every trial, because cause means they just can't be a jury. And they're off, and the judge has to let you, they can't be a juror on your case. But preemptive strikes are for people that otherwise would be fair and impartial, and they could be on your jury, but you don't want them there for whatever reason. You don't think they're going to be good for your case. So if you don't think the juror is going to be good for your case, you can use a preemptive strike. And in this case, and how many preemptive strikes you have changes in every case. So in this case, I think they said they have 15 preemptive strikes, and Derek Chauvin's lawyers have actually asked for more. We'll talk about why in a second. But they've actually asked for more preemptive strikes because of how difficult it is to try a case like this, because people already have all of their preconceived notions about Derek Chauvin, about George Floyd, and about what they think has already happened in this case. Everybody has seen the video of Derek Chauvin choking out George Floyd with his knee on the back of his neck and basically watching him die right there. Everybody's seen that video, so they're going to come into this trial as a potential juror already have seen that video, which is very difficult for defense attorneys and prosecutors to navigate as to whether or not they can be fair and impartial in making this decision. So they're going through these jurors one by one and picking them one by one. In most cases, how we pick jurors is you set up 35 potential jurors in all of the back of the courtroom, and they're all lined up, and you basically just go right down the line, juror number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You ask them all questions, you strike them, and then you say, all right, jurors 1 through 6, you guys are now on the jury. So, but how they're doing it in this case is they're doing it one at a time. So they're picking one juror at a time, which is really weird, and it gets even weirder when you talk about the fact that every case has alternate jurors. So those are jurors that aren't actually even going to be making the decision in the case. They sit through the entire trial, but they don't actually make the decision at the end because they're dismissed, because they were just an extra juror in case somebody got sick, in case somebody couldn't come back. They fill in for any juror that would potentially leave. So in this case, they're picking 12 jurors and 2 alternate jurors. So that's 14 total. But what's weird is they're doing it one by one. So they're up to 9 jurors so far. They still have 5 more to pick. And I'm wondering if they're going to pick the first 12, and those 12 are the real jurors, and then they're going to pick 2 more, and they're the alternate jurors, and the alternate jurors are going to know that they're the alternate jurors, which is a problem because they might not pay as close attention if they know they're not going to have to make this decision at the end. So that's something important to keep an eye on. Usually when we pick a jury, if we pick 6 jurors and 1 alternate, that's 7 jurors. The alternate doesn't know that they're the alternate. So when they stay in, we pick all 7 at once. They're the group of jurors. You guys are now our jury. They don't know that. So they pay attention throughout the entirety of the case. and they make the decision at the end, even though they're dismissed before the final verdict is actually brought in. But they're with the jury the entirety of the case. So as we go throughout this case, they're picking one at a time. And we're going to do weekly updates on what's going on in the trial. We're going to do videos. We may do more lives. I don't know. This is our first one, so we'll see how it goes. But the general theme in picking the jury is that the defense is striking people who already think Derek Chauvin's guilty, obviously. For people who said they can't get over that. And the prosecution is striking people that have problems with the Black Lives Matter movement. They have problems with the riots, and they think it's George Floyd's fault, and they don't think Derek Chauvin did anything wrong. So those are obviously the people that the prosecution is trying to strike. Now, the really difficult part, and we'll go through what some of the jurors they've already picked have said, is a juror can come in and say, I absolutely think Derek Chauvin is guilty. But if the prosecution says, can you put those feelings aside, and can you be fair and impartial in this case? And that juror says, yes, I think I can put those aside, then they can still be on the jury, even though they already have preconceived notions about this case as to whether or not Derek Chauvin's guilty of George Floyd's murder. So it's really weird because it's hard to pull the truth out of some of these jurors. But let's talk about some of them. So there's 9 jurors selected so far. And their racial makeup, because a lot of people were upset about the fact that there weren't enough minorities in the potential jury pool, what we call the venire. There weren't enough minorities in there as far as a lot of people were saying, as long as the media reports were saying, and they didn't think that was fair. A representative of the victim in this case. Now, that is, from experience, that is always true. Minorities are never fully represented in the venire. Whenever we have a minority client, it's really hard to get a jury pool of his or her peers because the jury pool is supposed to look like the defendant, or the victim. So they're supposed to have their peers making this decision. And a lot of times that's really hard if you have a minority client for a number of reasons. But in this case, that was one of the arguments against it. But when looking at the 9 that were selected, 4 identified as white, 1 was multiracial, 3 were black, and 1 was Hispanic. So that's what the racial makeup looks like right now. There's some minorities, there's some white, there's some multiracial, so there's kind of a good mix out of these 9 that they've picked. Now, this is interesting. 7 were in their 20s or 30s, and only 2 in their 50s. Most of the time, that's not the breakdown. Most of the time, there's not a huge majority of younger jurors on the jury than older jurors, but this one, that's how it's gone so far. And again, 7 is already half of 14, so there's going to be at least 50% that are younger, 20s and 30s. You have to be at least 18 to be on a jury. So that's a younger group of people that are going to end up on the jury. Now, some of the things are really interesting when you deal with what some of these jurors answered in their questions, and they still somehow made it on the jury. So one of the juries is a female biker who says she saw the riots happening right outside her house and believes that all lives matter. She told the court that she had a negative view of Chauvin because she believed the officers should have handled the situation better. So she's got some on both sides. She's all lives matter, but she also thinks Chauvin made mistakes during the arrest because she's seen the video. She's on the jury. Another person on the jury said that they work in banking and they coach youth sports. They have seen the police violence videos. They've seen police violence themselves. They've seen a kid being body slammed by police and someone being maced for not following orders quick enough. But that would not weigh in their attitude in being fair and impartial for this trial. Another person said they don't have strong views on the Black Lives Matter or the Blue Lives Matter movements, but they only believe that Blue Lives Matter was crafted mostly to counter against the Black Lives Matter. Whatever that means. They're on the jury. Another one said that he disagreed with the criminal justice system and said it was biased against minorities. And a woman said she was very excited to be on the jury. And another man said that he had a fairly negative view of Blue Lives Matter. And a single mom of two, and then a groom who said they will likely have to cancel their wedding to serve on the jury. So that's kind of crazy that a guy's gonna have to cancel his wedding to serve on the jury. Another person said they watched the video and they have a very negative perception of Chauvin. They said that it reminded them of a war scene from World War II, and it was worse than enemy combat, what they saw in that video. And that's somebody that's going to be on this jury. Now, what's crazy about this is no matter how bad something that a juror says seems to be for either side, if the prosecution or the defense follows up that question with, Are you able to set that aside? Are you able to be fair and impartial? Are you able to just look at this case and make the determination off the evidence you hear in this case and disregard anything you've seen in the media, disregard any videos that you've seen, disregard any articles that you've read? Can you just make decisions on this case? And if the juror says yes, no matter how they've answered, for the most part, no matter how they've answered those other questions, they can be still be what we call rehabilitated and still be put on this jury. Another man said that he's having difficulty with the presumption of innocence. The presumption of innocence is something every criminal defense attorney talks about in jury selection. No matter what you think you know, no matter what you've seen, no matter what you've read, the defendant that's sitting here before you today, as Derek Chauvin sits here before you today, he is presumed to be innocent. And if you don't think he's innocent right now before any evidence has been put before you, you can't be on this jury. So do you agree that he's innocent as we sit here today, because the state, as we sit here today, has not proven their burden? And some guy said, I have a real difficult time with that because based on the video I saw, it would be really hard for me to acquit Chauvin. Yet despite my strong emotions and statements, I think I could be fair and impartial, and that person was going to be on the jury until the defense used one of their preemptive strikes. So, and again, they get 15 of those preemptive strikes, and those are the ones that are not guaranteed. You can only do those preemptive strikes for any reason you want, as long as it's not based on a protected class. You can't strike them based on their race, religion, sexual orientation, anything like that. As long as you're not striking them for those reasons, you can strike him because you didn't like his answer to that question, that he can't understand the presumption of innocence. You can strike him for that. I would argue it should be a cause challenge, but the judge obviously didn't, so therefore the defense attorney had to use a preemptive strike on that juror, as crazy as it seems, because he's obviously not fair and impartial, but because he answered the magic question of, could you put that aside and be fair and impartial for this case? He said yes, therefore they had to use a preemptive strike on that juror. So let's talk now. They're in the middle of jury selection, and they come out with this $27 million settlement for George Floyd's family. So how does that affect jury selection? How does that affect this trial? Well, there's no question that it does, because even the judge is talking about the fact that he wishes they would stop talking about it in the news. He wishes that there was different timing as far as the settlement was concerned and the civil case was concerned. He said it's really unfortunate that all this stuff is coming out right now because it will affect this case. The defense attorneys filed a motion to continue the trial to try to wait till things settle down with this settlement, and then they can have a fair opportunity to present the defense for Derek Chauvin, because, as one potential juror said, that much money, $27 million paid for by the city, seems like they're admitting some level of guilt and some level of fault in this case. And if they're admitting guilt, then obviously Derek Chauvin must be guilty. So that's what's coming down the pipe now because of this $27 million lawsuit. So what the judge did was, instead of granting a continuance, which he didn't, he may grant a bit of a delay before picking the next few jurors, and instead is going to call in the jurors that they've already chosen, I think it was 7 before today, and ask them more questions about the settlement. Ask them if the settlement changes their mind. Do they think he's more guilty now? Can they not be fair and impartial now that they've seen $27 million, that huge of a settlement, paid for by a governing body, basically admitting the police negligence, which doesn't necessarily say second-degree murder or even manslaughter, but the judge allowed the lawyers to bring those jurors back in, ask them more questions about, does this settlement change your opportunity or your ability to be fair and impartial? And it seems like those 7 jurors all answered the questions appropriately, because I don't think any of them got struck by what they said about that settlement. But it's really weird, because you would think that the city would be in line with Derek Chauvin. They're obviously not. It almost seems like they wanted it to come out during this time. The civil lawyers may have even planned it to come out at this time and not accept the settlement until this jury selection started, so they could taint this jury pool. And it's really weird to think about finding a jury pool in Minnesota that doesn't know what's going on with this case, that didn't experience the riots, that didn't experience the media mayhem that was the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Derek Chauvin story. But that's what we're trying to do. We've had cases sometimes that are, so low profile, nobody even knows. A normal car accident, nobody's ever heard of this case. Doesn't matter, everybody comes in, they can be fair and impartial. But we've had some cases, and usually they're criminal in nature, that are higher profile, that everybody's already heard about, especially if something happens in Tampa, and it's a Tampa person that's been arrested, or somebody trying to commit a major crime in Tampa, to where it can be more difficult to find a fair and impartial jury. And we've had cases where we've had to go through jurors one at a time, and it's so laborious, it's so monotonous, because you have to ask the same questions to every juror to try to figure out whether they've read the articles, seen the media news videos, seen the videos or pictures that may have already had to do with the case, and already formed an opinion before they sit down and become a jury on this trial. So that's something you have to guard against. That's something really difficult to deal with as lawyers in a high-profile criminal case. Is it's almost impossible to find jurors that haven't had some experience with this case, haven't seen what it's about in the media, haven't watched the video of the death, and haven't read all the articles or seen all the talking heads talk about why he's guilty or why he's not guilty, why he fits into second-degree murder, not first, whatever it may be. You can't come into this trial as a juror with those kind of preconceived notions. I'm going to give it a couple minutes here, see if anybody on here has any questions. I can't even tell if anybody, it looks like there's only a couple people watching. So if anybody has any questions, I'll answer them now. But it's going to be a really weird process. It's going to be really unusual to pick a jury in this case, and unlike most cases, and most lawyers are never prepped for something like this, but as long as you understand your case, you understand everything that's come out about it, sometimes what can happen is when you're questioning these jurors, you can find out something you didn't even know as the lawyer. Like a juror could say, well, yeah, I saw this video on Fox or whatever it may be where it explained exactly why he fits into second-degree murder. I agree with that video. I agree with that article. And so you'll have to go look that up as the lawyer, find that video, find that article, see what it's about, so you can question the other jurors to say, well, this got 10 million views, which we can see stuff like that now. It didn't used to be like that if it was just newspaper articles or print media. You didn't know if people read it or not. Now you can actually track that. So I guess theoretically we can see if these jurors who have YouTube accounts or who have Instagram accounts, if they did see somebody from a news media outlet, if they did see them put on a case and prove Derek Chauvin's guilt, whatever it may be, or the other side, they could have proven George Floyd's state of mind, because that's a big thing that they're talking to the jurors about. What state of mind was he in? Did he have any contributing action to this? They could find out some videos, because there's been videos made on all sides of this. And is there a video out there that's very convincing? And can you track whether or not any of these potential jurors actually watched this video? Now, that's a lot of steps. That's a lot of time to take. But this is, a man's life we're talking about. So these measures will be taken to see, have people read these articles? Have they watched these videos? Back in the day, we weren't even able to... Looks like we have a question. So what do you think will happen in trial? So when we actually get to the trial, I think this is one of the most fascinating parts, is the jury selection portion, because you're trying to pick a fair and impartial jury. When we get to the trial, I do think he's going to be convicted. I think it'll be for a couple reasons. I don't know whether it'll be manslaughter or second-degree murder. I think we did a podcast on that and what we think it fits in the best. I had my dad on it, who's actually the best person to answer this question when it deals with criminal law stuff. But I think he will get convicted. I'll just say of manslaughter, which kind of splits the baby, which jurors do a lot of times. I think the video is damning. I think the jury's going to watch the video. But I also think it's really hard to find jurors that aren't already showing up with some answer already in their head. They've either convicted him or given him a not guilty verdict in their head when they show up and sit down and start to listen to the evidence on this trial. I don't know anybody in America that hasn't already made up their mind one way or the other, whether or not they think he's guilty of something, whether or not they would vote not guilty, whatever it may be. I feel like everybody's talked about this for so long, and it's just coming up again now because his criminal trial is happening, because the civil suit is settling, and I think everybody's kind of already made up their mind, but hopefully not. Hopefully the jury can sit there, be fair and impartial. Hopefully the jury can listen to what evidence is put on by both sides and make a determination as to whether or not there's enough evidence to convict Derek Chauvin of the crimes he's charged with, and they can listen closely to the statutes and the verbiage and the language of the law, and whether or not the actions fit into the law, and make a decision based on that, whatever decision they think is right. And that's the answer. Whatever the verdict is, there will be appeals maybe, I don't know. But whatever the verdict is, that's going to be it, and that's going to be the answer at the end of the day, no matter what we think. Because what a jury decides is the answer at the end of the case. We don't have to agree with it, but that's how the criminal justice system is set out. And once a jury makes a decision, that's the final decision, pending all appeals. So most of the articles that I read said that the defense attorney was the one having a bigger problem with these preemptive and cause challenges, getting rid of jurors that were obviously biased against Derek Chauvin. They've made multiple motions trying to get more preemptive strikes because they're dealing with all this. Now, really, this shouldn't be a problem because you have unlimited cause strikes. So if they really are totally biased and totally unfair, you should be able to strike them for cause. But it seems like a lot of these people are answering, well, no, I can put all my biases aside. I can put the fact that I think he's guilty aside and still be fair and impartial. So we'll see what happens with that. But one of the other reasons that Eric Nelson, I think is the defense attorney, that he asked for extra preemptive strikes was once the settlement came down, he said, I want extra strikes to deal with the fact that some people are going to be biased because of the settlement. So I should get more preemptive strikes than the prosecution because this is obviously beneficial for them. Judge said no. So he's stuck with his 15. That's all he's going to get. That's all both sides are going to get. They usually get equal amounts. In some cases, very rare. They can give one side more than the other, but usually they wouldn't do that. If they were going to give more to the defense, they would give more to the prosecution as well. I also saw something with juror number 55, so they've at least gone through 55 jurors. And most of our civil trials right now, with COVID, they're telling us only 20 potential jurors. So obviously the criminal cases, more serious cases dealing with life and liberty are going to get first crack at most of these jurors, especially a high-profile case like this. They're going to have an unlimited amount of jurors that they're going to get to pick. But we're limited to only 20 jurors now, which is really hard to pick a jury when you only have 20 people, to pick a very good, fair, and impartial juror when you only have 20 people. But that's kind of what we're stuck with in the civil realm right now because of the coronavirus. All right. I think that's about it on the Derek Chauvin jury selection process, or where we're at right now. So we'll do more of these in the future, I think. I know I have to figure out how to turn this off.